Welcome to the Pink Pill RX podcast, hosted by Katie and Jay Fillmore, where we navigate complex and thought-provoking topics surrounding women with a focus on education. For shorter form content, follow us on TikTok, Instagram, or YouTube at Caters88 or Pink Pill RX.
That's KATORS 88.
If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review. So before we begin, I want to remind our listeners that with the potential TikTok ban on the horizon, you can always find us on YouTube and Instagram. And we're committed to keeping our community connected regardless of what happens with TikTok. So make sure to follow us on these platforms to stay up to date with all of our content. And hey, if you love what we do and want to support our mission, consider joining us on our Patreon for $1 a month. And your contribution, it helps us continue bringing you this content. Also, if you have a story you'd like to share with our listeners and followers, please email us at pinkpillrx@gmail.com. All stories are shared anonymously unless specifically stated that you want your name included. As a reminder, we're your hosts, Katie and Jay Fillmore, and we're thrilled to have you join us for another eye-opening episode. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
We have a guest today. I'm so excited.
Me too.
So today's guest is an inspiring individual who has dedicated her career to uplifting her community. As one of my closest friends and a former boss, she holds a degree in social work and has focused her work on community resourcing and addressing critical issues such as gun violence in the community. A chronic pain sufferer with medical trauma, she brings a deeply personal perspective to her advocacy. She joins us today to discuss the unique struggles Black women face in their communities and in healthcare, challenges often overlooked by more privileged groups. I'd like to welcome MacKenzie Cloy to the Pink Pill RX podcast. Thank you for being here.
Yay! Thank you guys for having me.
We are very excited to have some eye-opening discussions today. I know that my eyes will probably be opened.
Mine always are, so.
Yeah, that's true. That won't
Really
be a change.
wide.
Yeah, really wide today.
So before diving into some of the discussion we're going to have today around healthcare and like systemic racism in healthcare and things like that, I would love if you could share a little bit of your background, how you became a chronic pain sufferer, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So I was in a car accident when I was 17 years old. I was driving. My little sister was in the passenger seat, flipped our car 3 times, fractured my frontal lobe and 4 vertebrae in my spine, was unconscious on the scene, was life-flighted from the scene to University of Michigan Children's Hospital, where they did an emergency brain surgery that pretty much saved my life. Lived in the hospital for about 8 weeks before I was moved to an outpatient facility, and have been 8 years post-accident, and it has been 8 long years of navigating, not just because I sustained a traumatic brain injury in the head injury or because of the damage to my skull, and so not just navigating the world with a traumatic brain injury, but also navigating the world with the way that my spine healed, which is not fully back together. So I have parts of my spine that are still kind of fractured as is. So navigating pain, TBI, anxiety, PTSD, all the things. Here we are.
Yeah. Wow. Remind me, did you have to learn to walk again?
I did, because I had paralysis. So the entire left side of my body, I had paralysis for about a week where I couldn't move that side of my body. So when I was able to start moving, like everything was just, the sides of my body weren't matching. So my right side of my body and my left side of my body were like very different. Strength, very different. Like I couldn't feel like certain parts of my side of my body where I had lost feeling. And it really wasn't until 6 months ago that I regained all of the feeling and all of the sensations in my entire body. So even as I recovered, a lot of my rehab in that first year, I didn't, like, even though I could walk and I had movement, I couldn't really feel what was going on. I didn't even really know how much I wasn't feeling until 6 months ago, until I went through I went through myofascial release for the first time, which is a form of occupational therapy. And it brought back all of the sensations that I hadn't been feeling in my body that I didn't really even know I wasn't feeling.
Were you just made aware of this type of therapy?
up until the past year, there wasn't any myofascial release specialist in this area, and there is now one. And she's the only myofascial release specialist that works for an entity that builds insurance within like a 60-mile radius.
Whoa.
And my rehabilitation doctor had been wanting me to get in that to try myofascial release for like the last 2 years. So I hadn't even really heard of it until one of my doctors offered it as maybe something that we could try to see if this would help with any of the symptoms. And I was warned that sometimes, like, when you go through this, it can bring back memories. It can release trauma that's stored in your body, because the trauma, they say trauma is stored in the fascia, which is the layer underneath your skin. So when they do the myofascial release, it can be a very emotional, trauma releasing experience, as well as just the physical.
Yeah, that makes sense. That is crazy. Every time I hear that story, or every time I see you share pictures of your accident and stuff, the fact that you walked away with, I'll bet, lots of rehab to do so, but that that you're here is wild to me.
Wild. And watching even like the videos of me like right after the accident when I was in the hospital trying to learn how to walk, and then like looking in the mirror, it does freak me out very often when I like having the double take, because you were in an induced coma, like you were intubated, like induced coma, the whole 9 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. And like even when I did wake up, I had a tube in, so I couldn't, like, that was a traumatic experience.
Oh, yeah.
And like the PTSD, the flashbacks I have now are waking up in the hospital in that moment. And like when I start to get overwhelmed, I start to feel the tube in my throat. I start to feel like the sensations of what it felt like to wake up. I didn't feel it at that time, but I feel it now when I have flashbacks. So it's just a weird PTSD thing. But when I first woke up, did all my communication just by writing on a whiteboard, because I was intubated.
So I'm curious to know, I mean, you were very young, so I don't know if you like picked up on very much during that time especially, but since then you've also had lots of interactions with healthcare individuals. Can you share at all how systemic racism has like shaped your experience in healthcare, especially regarding like your medical trauma?
Yeah. I think it's important to know that I was raised in a white family. And so I'm a biracial individual, and my dad's black, my mom's white. At the time of the accident, I was living with my mom, my stepdad, my step-siblings, who are all white. So most of my experience within the first 2 years post-accident with the medical system was going to doctor's appointments with my white mom or my white sister. In 2021, I got married to my husband. I moved to Illinois. I went to college in Illinois, so I've been here for about 5 years. It was within that time span that I started going to appointments here in Illinois with my black husband instead of with my white mom. And it was that, I would say 2022, that first year of going to appointments with my husband and bringing him along to it. And that was when I started to realize that I get treated differently when I come to appointments with my husband. And I would rather just come to appointments either by myself, or it's actually a benefit to me if I bring my mom to appointments with me, because we get talked. I don't know. It's such a unique, it's crazy even thinking about it and taking myself back to those moments now. And I think the first time that I realized what was happening, because doctors were slowing themselves down. They were repeating things. They were trying to explain things like we were idiots. Like that's how I felt like they were talking to me. Only when my husband was in the room with me though. And like I had to advocate for myself so much more in those moments versus when I go to appointments with my mom, like never had anybody questioning me, never had anybody questioning what I was saying. So I didn't experience like pushback from doctors until that point. Like I had never received that. So I didn't have to become an advocate for myself until that point in my life when I was on my own. And because I was a minor when the accident happened and I'm 26 now, it does look different, but I didn't have to advocate for myself the same way I do now at that time.
I think about the contrast of the fact that like just yesterday I purposefully brought Jay into a doctor's appointment with me because I didn't feel like I was being taken seriously. And so like when I feel that way, he's the person that I grab, you know, and I can't imagine not just like not having that, but like you do have an amazing supportive husband.
Totally.
Who has a master's degree and is brilliant and like doesn't need to be talked to that way.
Yeah.
And that's just crazy that assumption is, I keep saying crazy. Yeah. It's really not. It's the state of the world. I get that. Like, but
it's like shocking when you experience it for the first time or when you realize in those moments what's happening.
It's so just blatant.
Yeah.
The contrast between those, that's so wild.
And like not just one time. Like this is like years of experience. Like years with my mom and then years with my husband. So it's I would give go to different doctors, give people chances. Like it wasn't just a one-time thing.
So it was just an overarching pattern over and over and over again.
Yes.
And how did he react, or how does he feel about that? Because I'm sure that he feels like he can't be the support person that he would desire to be.
I don't think he really realized what was going on at first either, because he wasn't around for my accident. He hadn't gone to appointments with me before. So it was all new for him. It wasn't until I really started to explain to him, this is not normal. This is not how my appointments normally go. This is not how my doctors normally are. Like this is not. And now he realizes, so like prepping for appointments looks very different right now. And we go through the list of like how stressful of an appointment is this going to be? Am I going to have to advocate for myself a lot? Is this going to be very emotional? Do I need a support person, or can I manage this on my own? Because it's going to be better if I just manage it on my own and go on my own. And he understands that now. But he also understands that some of these appointments are really heavy emotionally, and it's not good or safe for me to go alone. And I do need a support person. So we kind of, in prepping for every appointment now, have a little bit of like a checklist that we have to run down and make the decision. Is it worth having a support person, knowing this is going to potentially be a risk and knowing this is going to potentially take more advocating, but I need a support person? Or do I just go by myself to not even have to deal with this? And that is like, I have a treatment team of 7, so we have a lot of appointments.
Yeah. So discrimination and stereotyping that they're doing with you is essentially making a lot more work for you, because now you have to do even more prep for these appointments. And it's already very emotional, like you're talking about. It's very intense, and there's PTSD from it. And so you have another layer of emotional hardship because they're putting you through this. You have to advocate more for yourself, and you're not going to be listened to as much. And so they're just piling it on.
And the ones I know, like, especially I've had a hard time finding a neurologist and kind of bounced around. And specifically, like, I've just had my mom come into town when I have those appointments because I know I don't want to be alone. But also when it's a brand new doctor, I don't want Eric in the room. I just don't. I will bring him in casually once I build that relationship with a new doctor. So it's like even the travel expenses of my mom needing to come. She lives 5 hours away. So planning not just for me, but also to pay for a support person to come into town when I know I'm going to need a support person at this appointment, and it can't be my husband.
What's interesting to me is, having heard all the things from Katie about healthcare and for women specifically, and now hearing you with being a Black woman with healthcare, and the extra emotional and financial expense that everything takes. We've talked about the pink tax before, but it's like you have an additional tax being a person of color that causes more financial, like with the travel expenses and everything. Yeah. And if you're not listened to, and you have to go through things that you know are not going to work for you, but they're going to force you to try anyway, then that's added expense. It's like you just have another tax.
Yeah. Like the amount of physical therapy that I've done in 8 years just to prove to people that I've done physical therapy before and to get them to listen to me. Yeah, that's the first thing that pops into my mind.
Unbelievable. I had one more question. Where you had your doctor's appointments back in, was it Michigan? Okay. Was it a different type of demographic community, or was it more like a populated versus the smaller town that we're in? Or I'm just curious if this is worse in smaller communities too, or with a different demographic makeup, or if it's just like, not to say that would be why. I'm just curious if that plays any type of role in it too. Like if it's safer to go to like a more like a city hospital, if that happens less type thing.
I would say probably. In Michigan, I was in Ann Arbor, which is where University of Michigan is, but it's not like a super, super diverse area. It's definitely bigger than this community is. And I will say when I first started to build my treatment team, I was going back and forth to Chicago because I could find doctors of color at Rush University, where I couldn't necessarily find doctors of color in the specialty areas that I needed here locally. Traveling to Rush and traveling to Chicago became more of a stressful thing than like I need to be able to go back to work after my appointment. And so the 2-hour round trip was hard, but I think getting to a city gives you more access to, I really wanted to build a treatment team of color. So as many doctors of color that I could find, that was my first priority. The drive just became too much. So I've tried to get as many as I can locally, but it's definitely, I think, being in a bigger city helps.
Yeah. And I'm sure, I'm assuming that you're listened to much more by physicians of color.
Yes.
And then you have an added tax of having to drive and pay for gas and pay for parking and the time to actually reach those doctors and those specialties.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. I can't imagine, because as being a white guy, just whatever doctor, I never even think about that.
I didn't even realize how much power and choice I had, and so I took that very seriously. And I have 3 doctors of color on my team right now, and they are my favorite, and they are the ones that I feel like listen to me the most and have built a relationship not just with me but with my husband, and listen to both of us when we go into those appointments. So I've totally, before I experienced it, I didn't think it mattered. Now I know how much it matters.
Yeah.
Is there a specific experience you can think of where you felt like your pain or your symptoms were dismissed or minimized by your healthcare professional?
Yeah. When I really tried to start getting help again. So 2022, I ended up in the hospital sometime fall of 2022 because I woke up and was having like this crazy sharp pain in my spine that was like affecting my breathing. So every time I was breathing, like the pain in my spine was like pinching my breath. And so it was after that point that I really started fighting to try to get help, and wasn't finding any doctors that would take my case and like help me move the needle forward to get MRIs again, to get back into therapy, to get back into, like I had given up a little bit, and I had stopped going to all my appointments for a little bit because I was just really struggling with what I was experiencing. And at that point, I knew how bad things were, and I knew I needed help. I went back to Michigan to the doctor that had done both my brain surgeries and both my neck surgeries, and was hoping that he was going to be able to just help advocate for me with some of the doctors here in Illinois. And pretty much was told, like, if back pain is the worst thing that you're experiencing, like, I don't know what to tell you. This is as good as it's going to get. Like, you shouldn't be walking, you shouldn't be talking, you should be paralyzed. If this is the only thing that you're struggling with, there's not really much I can do or tell you other than to go get in shape.
Oh my gosh.
So that was hard. That was really hard. And that was what I then experienced a lot when I first started trying to get help in Illinois, of like, well, of course you're in back pain. Like, of course you're in pain. Like, you shouldn't be alive. But like, you're lucky you're not in a wheelchair. Like, you're lucky you're not paralyzed. Like,
oh, so just because you don't have those problems, that it shouldn't matter then that you're in pain.
You should be grateful.
Yeah.
You should be grateful.
And I also will say it's interesting that I've never been offered pain medication.
So they're like, you shouldn't be alive, but go take some Tylenol?
No, yes.
Or ibuprofen?
Yes. That is like literally yes. And not that I wanted pain medication, because I didn't. But
it'd be nice if somebody
I wasn't even offered it. Like, yeah. And I was like, I can't fight for it, because then they're like, I'm for sure just gonna get Like,
Yeah. Or you're here for the drugs only.
exactly. Yeah.
So then how do you advocate for yourself in healthcare situations where you feel like you're not being taken seriously?
I would leave. I would find, like, I have walked out, and I have I have left places and never went back. And,
Okay.
And there was that period of 2020 to 2022 was rough, and I had just kind of given up on finding help and finding people to listen to me. And then with everything going on in the world, it was just a heavy time where I felt there was going to be no hope for me for sure as a Black woman in this, because there's no hope for Black women in America. Like, it's just a heavy time. At this point, I have established a foundational treatment team that has followed me for the last 2 years, who I have doctors that I really like and really trust. There was a time I was walking out of places and I'm okay, you're not the one then. Move on to the next.
Yeah.
And just kept moving on and kept trying. I got the rehabilitation doctor I'm with right now, I started seeing her in 2022 after I got out of the hospital. I got a referral to see her. She was like the first person that really listened to me, really. Like, I think my first appointment with her was 2 hours long. She listened to everything. She wrote notes. She cared. Like, I was like, okay. If I have one, that's all I need, and I can build with one. And that gave me hope, because I was like, okay, I can do this.
It sounds like the biggest piece of advocacy you can do for yourself is getting yourself providers of color.
Yeah. And giving yourself time and space, because you're going to get pissed off and you're going to get angry, and it's emotional. Like, it does weigh on your mental health. And if you just try to push and fight and look for a doctor, get into a point, like, you burn out almost. Like, I did burn out. So I have to, like, when I get frustrated and when I have bad experiences, I have to give myself space to cool down, a break from appointments, and then I got to try again. Because when I would just fight, push, I would just get burnt out and give up. And then I'm not taking my meds. I'm not going to therapy. I'm not I need to focus on taking care of me. I have no hope in this system to help me. So I got to focus on taking care of me, and I got to do what I can do in small pieces.
I can't help but wonder if I was in your position. I had that accident. I moved from Michigan to here and how much quicker it would have been for me to get the things that took you so long to get.
Yeah, I mean, because it's difficult for a woman, let alone a woman of color. Have you found any effect? I mean, aside from choosing providers of color, have you found any other effective strategies for building trust with healthcare providers? Like, are there any tips or tricks?
I mean, consistency helps, and getting with people and giving them a chance. And it sucks, but trying it out for an extended period of time, a certain amount of appointments, give them a chance. Doctors are a little ignorant already, as is. So you kind of have to get over the hump of this person might not be super friendly, super charismatic. A lot of doctors are just
it's like almost you got to
cold.
sacrifice some other stuff if you want.
That's kind of what I've come to that place of it's the reality of the situation. So you kind of have to deal with the reality of your situation first, and then hope for the best and get over that hump and give them a little bit of a chance to get the help that you need, because it's better than walking out and getting nothing. But you do got to walk out sometimes, and that's where it's I think everybody has to find a balance that works best for them and protect their own mental health, because it is a very intense and heavy process. But outside of just advocating and finding doctors of color, sometimes you just got to suck it up and deal with it and give them a chance and see if you can get help that you need, and make sure you have therapy right after that doctor's appointment, because and finding a good therapist. And I will say that maintaining therapy during this entire process, because it is hard and it is heavy, and there's sometimes it is so out of control. There's nothing that you can do about it other than bite your tongue and just keep it moving.
There's a lot of women out there that struggle with chronic pain. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you have tried? Is it the what is it called?
Myofascia release.
Myofascia release. Is that the thing that has helped you the most? Or like, because you've tried so many things. So I'm just curious to know, just in case somebody's never heard of something before, I'm curious to know if there's anything specific you've tried where it was like, oh, wow, I should have tried that a long time ago.
Myofascial release for sure. Chiropractic care has been really amazing for helping with my pain. And I will say like a break, like a 2-year break that I took in chiropractic and then getting back into it, it was like a very painful experience. But consistent chiropractic care has been really helpful. I also have utilized medical cannabis. So I have a medical card, and that's why, like, when it comes to pain management medication, a lot of that you can't drive on, you can't work on, you can't do anything. And medical cannabis does. There's different products I've found that numb the pain a little bit to the point where I can still work and I can still function like a real person. Other treatment that has been really helpful is I do get some injections, specifically trigger point injections, because they're different because they're into the muscle. So it's kind of like the numbing gel that you get in your jaw, but it's like numbing gel that they put directly into your muscles. So it just kind of numbs your muscles a little bit. And I can get those forever. So I could get trigger point injections in my back muscles every 6 weeks for the rest of my life. It's not the greatest for my body, but I could do that.
Mm-hmm. So I want to touch on something that you said about medical cannabis. The medical cannabis world is very different from the medical world in the sense that if you are nervous about initiating medical cannabis, or nervous because it's like, I don't even know where to start or what I would even take, or what, the people at dispensaries are so freaking nice.
They are.
Okay? They're so nice. They're called bud tenders, okay? The ones that are behind the counter. And I just want to say that they are so helpful. You can go in there, you can talk to them about exactly what's going on, and they can make recommendations and stuff. And they're just really, really kind about it. So I think that's how all medical care should be. Yes. But I just want to encourage anybody who maybe has been on the fence about that when managing their chronic pain, that's not something you need to be nervous about. Those are very helpful people.
Yeah. A lot less scary to go into the dispensary than it is to go in a doctor's appointment, which sucks.
And they're helpful, and they believe you.
Yeah.
When you say you're in pain. Shifting out of the medical side of things a little bit, can you share a pivotal moment in your life that made you acutely aware of your identity as a Black woman? You have a unique background, having been raised in a white family. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if there was ever like a contrast there where things really stood out to you for the first time, or if there's any other stories that you would be willing to share.
I have, two that kind of come to mind. One that I just found out about from one of my older sisters like a month ago. And she was, so I have 7 siblings. I have a lot. They're all, half are Black and half are white. My oldest Black sister, we were spending Christmas together, and she was like, MacKenzie, do you remember when you were 2 years old and I picked you up and we had went to the mall, and you looked at me and you said, "You're Black just like my dad." Oh. And I was like, no. I mean, the only Black people that I knew at that point in my life was my dad and my older sisters. There weren't other Black people in my area. There were not Black people in books. They did not have like the resources they have right now. Then leading up to that, the first time I really experienced racism in school was in 3rd grade. And that was when I like really started to realize I look different than the people around me, especially because I went to a pretty small, very white school in a country town. Like there's 800 people that live in the town I grew up in. So it is a very small town. And I was in 3rd grade playing on the playground, and next day came back to school playing on the playground, and the boy that I had been playing on the playground with all week came up to me and said, "I am not allowed to be friends with you anymore because you're Black, and my grandpa does not like Black people."
Oh.
And I didn't understand what that meant, and I didn't tell my parents about it until 2020. So I just said okay and kept moving. But that's what I think of.
The trauma. Like, that's so sad.
Yeah.
And were you living with your mom at the time?
I was.
So then at home, it's like, did you feel comfortable? Like you could talk about that?
No, and I think that's why I never did. And it really, like, even with my parents did the best they could, and it was a different time. And like my mom took me to black hairstylists so I could get my hair done and get the hair that I wanted. I could get my braids done. Like, my mom did the best that she could, for sure. Did not have the amount of resources that are around right now. But it wasn't talked about enough, and nobody ever really broke it down for me. Like, this is why you look different than everyone else. And this is like, I didn't understand that until I grew up and went away to college. And in college and being out in the real world, I experienced what real life looked like as a black woman. In my community, I think I had a lot of privilege. My mom always had a good job. We didn't go without. We didn't have a ton of money, but we never went without. So I did grow up with a certain element of privilege that it wasn't until I left that privilege and was treated like every other black woman in America that I really even experienced, I guess, how much different it was.
What are some of the things that you noticed or experienced when you...
The first time that I had a bad interaction with a police officer was my freshman year of college. I had been pulled over before, but I had never been scared of police officers. I had never seen a black person get mistreated by a police officers. I thought that was just I didn't really think that was a real thing that happened. I just heard about it. Until me and a group of black friends were walking from campus to Perry Farm, and we got stopped by the police, and they were like questioning us. They made all of us show our IDs. It was the first time I had ever had an experience with a police officer where I was scared, and I felt like, oh my God, we are getting stopped right now because we are black. Like, that is what's happening. And that was what was happening.
Yeah.
You know how many times I've walked in that same area to or from Perry Farm with a group of people that are like white people.
Yeah.
Never gotten stopped so many times.
Yeah.
We've been at Perry Farm before, like when we were younger, by the way, Perry Farm is like a park nature preserve. We should say that.
Yeah. It's not literally, well, I mean, there's some animals. There's a little farm
like,
spot.
It's like there's walking trails and stuff like that. So, but even like past the time that you're really allowed to be there, and I wasn't stopped by anybody.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, when the sun's setting and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's what they were saying. The sun was setting, and we were already on our way back to campus. Like, we were on our way back.
Oh, so you weren't even going in. You were coming out.
Yes.
Oh, my gosh.
Some BS explanation there.
How does the stress of racism impact your mental health and well-being, like, on a daily basis?
A lot.
It sounds like, yeah.
A lot now, especially because, in third grade, when that kid said that to me, it didn't really have a lot of weight to it. And I didn't care. I shrugged it off, and I went and found other kids to play with. And you're a kid, and you don't really understand the extent of what that means, that somebody just told you they can't be your friend because you're black. Now, like, even thinking about that, like, brings goosebumps and brings chills. And, like, it's almost like as I've grown up, I'm looking at all of the experiences I've had with a new lens. And unfortunately, I did work in a job that worked with individuals that had been affected by gun violence for a period of time. And I left that job because of how bad it was for my mental health. And because I had gotten to the point where, like, every time my husband walked out the door, I felt like he was going to get shot because he was a black man. And I couldn't be in that environment where black men were getting shot and killed and shooting each other. Like, it was just so heavy and intense. It was all I was thinking about, because it's a real thing that's happening all over. And the more that black men are getting murdered and are getting, like, it affected me a lot. I had to make the decision at that time that even though I was doing good work and helping, it was not good for my mental health. And so I had to leave that working environment because it was making me so fearful of being a black woman married to a black man that I can't live in fear. So I had to get out of that environment just because of how bad it was for my mental health. I work in a mental health practice now, and it is not as much of a daily fear as it used to be, as it was during that point in my life. 2020, daily fear. The week of the inauguration, daily fear.
Ugh.
Like, it depends on what's happening in the world, and that is kind of, it goes in waves. Like,
Yeah, it's so tied to, like, current events.
Yeah.
I want to circle back to the question before where we were talking and you had mentioned it sounds like you were very much cut off from Black culture or any kind of like identity within that circle. And then it sounds like you didn't really encounter that until you were in college. And like, do you mourn that at all?
Yeah, so I will say I was born in Detroit. My mom was a single mom for the first 4 years of my life. We lived in the Detroit area. When I was 7, she got married to my stepdad and moved. Between that age of 4 and 7, we moved from the Detroit area to her hometown where my grandparents lived, about 2 hours south of Detroit. So it is a primarily white area, but my dad's side of the family all still lived in the Detroit area. So yes and no. I still went to Detroit often. I had a relationship with my dad growing up. I didn't go to his house every other weekend, but I still would go there for holidays. And so I had that connection to the Black side of my family, but I definitely was not submerged in Black culture. So I've always really valued my hair because I've always had really kinky, curly, Black, natural hair. And so my mom made that a priority to make sure that I was getting my hair done by somebody Black that knew what they were doing, that could do the type of hair that I wanted, whether that was box braids, whether that was getting a weave put in, or whether that was, my hair is in dreadlocks now, but this is very new. While I was growing up, that was something I struggled with because all the girls had straight, pretty blonde hair and I did not. And that probably was the Black culture piece that I missed out on because I didn't know what to do with it. I was never taught how to do it myself.
And your mom doesn't know.
Yeah, and she tried and we would fight and like I would scream and I would cry and it would just turn into a fight and she didn't know what to do or how to help me with it. So she just found people that could. And that's where I think I kind of think she did her best to try to find, even though we moved to an area where there were not a lot of people of color, she did her best to try to find those pockets for me. So I played AAU basketball and I played basketball with other biracial women that were in similar situations or that grew up with similar type families where they had a single mom, Black dad. Like I had a group of friends that were all biracial, white mom, Black dad, like that kind of thing that we played basketball together. So I definitely do mourn it a little bit, but I also I don't know if I would have wanted to grow up any other way because I loved growing up in the country and I loved being able to be close to my grandparents and I loved our community, as rough as it was at some points, really rallied around my family after my car accident. I was able to get back into school and finish school because we had a small community. We had I think there were parts of living in a small town that I loved that while I mourn not having as much diversity around me and I didn't see people that looked like me, I also don't know if I would have wanted to grow up in Detroit either. Yeah.
And would that be your advice for people, let's say moms that are in similar situations as your mom was in, right? Mm-hmm. Let's say single mom, Black dad, but maybe not super involved or something like that. Would that be your advice then, is prioritizing those things?
Definitely. Especially I think hair, Black women especially find a lot of their identity in their hair. Mm-hmm. And so I think natural hair care is super important and learning alongside of them, learning how to do their hair. There are a lot more books around right now than there were. I never saw books that had brown people in them. So I wish I would have had more things like Black dolls, Black books, things like that growing up. I don't know how much those were. They're around a lot more right now. Mm-hmm. But I think in addition to prioritizing some of those aspects of I really loved basketball and I really liked getting my hair done. And those are two things that basketball is popular in the Black community. And there's basketball courts everywhere. Everyone can play basketball. And that was those things I resonated and connected with. So I think, yeah.
How do you feel about the phrase, I don't see color? And what would you like people to understand about that phrase?
It's a lie. I mean, you do. I think people try to be I think it's pastors. I think of Christians and pretty white people. I don't see color. Okay, you're trying to be nice.
Well, that's a privileged
do.
Starting point, isn't
Yes.
it? Is it just to even say that is a privileged starting point?
Yeah. And it's just not true. Like, you do see color. I understand what people are trying to say. And maybe that's like, I think I do understand what you're trying to get at when you say that. It's not helpful because you do. Like, you do see, if Jay walks in a room and my husband walks in a room, you're going to know that's a white man, that's a black man. Mm-hmm. You might be trying to say, I don't associate negative black stereotypes to black men, and I don't see them by those things. I think that's what people are trying to say. But when you say, I don't see color, you're just pissing people off because it's a triggering sentence.
It's also negating, like, identity almost,
Totally.
right?
Yes.
When you're saying that.
Yes.
It's like saying, I don't see you.
Yeah, like, I want you to see my color. Like, I want you to see me as a black woman. I want you to see my color. Like, it is part of my identity. It's not all of my identity. It's not the only thing that matters. But saying you don't see it is saying you don't see a big part of who I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if somebody says to you, I don't see color, does that already tell you something about that person and that they may or may not have a lot of close relationships with people of color?
Yes. And I usually laugh and I usually say, well, you do. And that's usually how I handle it. And I usually try to have these conversations with people that say that because I need you to stop saying that.
Yeah.
And I'm probably going to be nicer than anyone else is going to be to you. So let's talk about this. But yeah, it does give me insight into that person and where they're kind of coming from.
It's kind of a tell.
Mm-hmm.
What I always find ironic is the people that often say I don't see color also then tell a story about, the other day a black guy, like, they have to identify the race of the person if they're a different, you know what I'm saying?
It doesn't even matter
and
to
it's
the
like,
story.
I'm sorry, that has no bearing on the story you're about to tell.
Yeah.
It seems like those are the same genre,
Absolutely.
though, of people.
Absolutely. Like, yep.
I think a lot of white people that I know all have at least one family member that talks that way. Like, they tell a story and they feel the need to identify the race of the individual, even though, like you said, Katie, it has nothing to do with the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember we went out with a pastor once and we were all talking and they were just telling a story how they invited the whole basketball team over for like dinner and they loved it and stuff. And then story was going great. And then he just threw in, they were so grateful and they were all black. And I was like,
What was the need?
What? Like, this story was a great story until you said that, because now I can't go to your church. So that's you lost me.
Yeah.
What are you trying to communicate with that? Are you trying to say, hey, look, I'm a person that doesn't see color. So just so you guys know, they were all black. So I'm a good guy. Like, do you think that could, like, what? I'm not saying that was the reason, but what's the reason?
I don't know sometimes. And I really don't even think people realize sometimes how bad it is when they say things like that. But it's hard to explain. If you don't get it, it's hard to explain it.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Something that you probably do not even remember this interaction that you had with me. But you taught me actually a really good lesson. And it was all in my head, so it really wasn't out loud. But because of how approachable and gentle you are, I remember when we were first working together and the topic of race had come up. It was a conversation I walked into. I don't even remember what the context was, the conversation, but I walked into it. And I remember saying to you something to the effect of like, well, if I ever say anything that is, that comes across inappropriate when it comes to color, like, please let me know. And then you were very gentle and you kind of like him-hawed around a little bit. And it dawned on me at that moment that like, that's an additional tax on you. That's an additional like emotional tax on you. Like, that is not your responsibility to tell me, like, I need to educate myself on what are things that I could be doing that are
Implicit bias.
Yes. What kind of implicit bias do I have? Like, I need to do an introspection. Like, I don't need to just like go throughout life and then just like expect my black friends to correct me if I hope that you would, but like, that's not your responsibility either. So that was a lesson that you taught me. And I don't know if you know if you taught me that or not,
didn't.
but you did.
That's good.
all.
That's not where I thought you were going.
Well, where'd you think I was going?
Your mother and my hair.
Yes.
I don't know.
No,
What
we can
happened
talk
there?
about that.
You can tell that story.
Oh my gosh. My mom, when she first met MacKenzie, walked up to MacKenzie, like saying nothing, just walked up to her and just put both hands around her head and like touched her hair.
And I had a poof at this time.
Yeah. So she, was just.
But the intrusive thoughts win?
Yes. And
They
she just
did.
goes, I just love your hair. And I ended up having to tell her afterwards, Mom, that was wildly inappropriate. You do not do that. You know, we're laughing about it now, but I was horrified. Like,
Totally.
I was so.
You were.
Like,
you were horrified.
I don't
And
even
you
know how
felt
to
so
navigate.
bad. And I laughed because
How
I
do
knew
I
her
mend
intentions.
this?
And I knew, and this is where I have a soft spot because my family is white. I understand that white people that aren't around a lot of black people don't always know those lines and don't always know those rules. And so I laugh of like, it's kind of my anxious way of responding, but also because I think those moments are hilarious to be the one to teach them this is not okay.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I always appreciate your patience and your willingness to teach and be an educator because that takes a lot. That's very taxing.
It is. And it's not a responsibility that there are a lot of black people that don't want that responsibility.
Sure.
I feel like because of my experience as a biracial black woman, I have such a cool lens into seeing both sides. I feel like it is what I was made to do. Like I enjoy being a bridge builder and helping speak to both sides. My husband doesn't have the time or energy to want to do that and doesn't care to because it's not his responsibility. And I don't think it should be.
Correct. Yeah.
And I will say this is probably an interesting perspective also. I feel like as a biracial woman, sometimes people think they have more right to do things like that versus
Interesting.
like a real black woman. Like that's what I've been told before. Like people see me as half white sometimes, so people think they have more, like they feel more comfortable doing things like that to me. And granted, I don't think that was your mom, but in my experience, I have experienced spaces where I get treated differently than full black women do. And people almost feel like they have more of a right to ask me those weird questions or uncomfortable questions or like, I'm not racist, but like those type of things.
Oh, okay.
To me, because they don't see me the same. So they feel more comfortable being inappropriate.
You made a great point a couple weeks ago to me, and I can't remember the context of the conversation, but we were talking about how, you know, you are mixed and how sometimes it's like almost like you're not white enough for the white people, but not black enough for the black people. And you're like in this in between, you know, but when the world looks at you, they see black woman.
Yeah.
And that's what.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
They don't see light skin, mixed, biracial.
Right.
They see us all the same.
Yeah.
All of us that have pigmented, darker skin are put in this same category. And the world sees us all as black women. So that is why I do identify as a black woman. And I will say biracial black woman it's just long sometimes, or I'll just say BIPOC, and like we're all in the BIPOC circle. But some people do get offended when I call myself a black woman because lighter skinned black women get treated differently than darker colored black women. And everybody has their own perspectives and experiences on it for sure. But I identify as a black woman because I am seen as a black woman by the world.
So how has systemic racism or your personal experiences affected your perception of safety in public spaces?
Other than the fact that I scan every room I walk into. Like I don't feel safe in the public. And I'm hyper aware. It makes me going into the public. If I know I don't have the energy for this today, I don't go in the public.
I remember one of our first Man v. Bear conversations. You were educating me on what you do when you walk up to your vehicle. You look underneath it. As soon as you get in, check the back seat, lock the door. You know, that type of thing. And I'm like, oh, sometimes I just sit in there with the doors unlocked on my phone. Just chilling.
Thank you.
At
Right?
Menards
That was
parking
my
lot, just-
response.
No.
You know, but and then I made a comment about like, oh, well, then your cortisol levels have to be elevated far more frequently than a man's cortisol levels. So then I wonder if that's just even more amplified for you, that your cortisol is high when you're in public spaces.
All the time, because I'm always on high alert, especially if I'm with my husband, because I don't like people staring at him or looking at him. Like, I feel like when we're in public together, protecting him is my responsibility. So I don't take him into places that I know are going to be unsafe for us, for him. Like, we get treated differently just because he's a big dude and he's a big black dude. And he
Freaking
gets treated differently.
Off.
And so, yeah, if we don't have the energy for that, we don't leave the house.
Yeah. I got to say, I love Eric so much.
He really
He
does.
loves
And
you
he
so
says that
much.
randomly.
I will
Just-
randomly
he'll
say
just
that, Katie, I love Eric.
Love it.
You're really growing on him, too.
Good.
He has been talking about you more and more, so this is great.
I've been thinking about, I don't really watch sports, but I've been thinking about how can I get invested in football? So maybe me and Eric, next season can watch football.
I did ask him about coming on, and he did say no. But
Okay.
he said maybe in the future. And
Okay.
I said, okay, we'll get there.
Yeah.
Because he likes having these type of conversations, but it's just the energy. Like,
Yeah.
he's a teacher, so no, he doesn't want to give his weekly energy
Yes.
to
Sure.
this.
Yeah, maybe we'll hit him up in the summer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that'd be
no,
great.
it would be great to have that perspective as well. Like, I mean, I don't know what you would call this. We just say pink pill. I don't know if we call it being black pilled
I
or
like
something
it.
like
I
that.
like
but
that.
I do feel like
Yeah.
I've been black pilled a little bit here, just because there's things that you've said that I didn't know or I haven't thought about because of the privilege in which I live. Now, you probably have a unique experience with this. And it sounds like you've already kind of shared a little bit about this, about the difference between how you see police officers treat black versus white people. And it sounds like your experience, like you've had experiences with police officers when you lived in Michigan, I'm assuming,
Yeah.
but been very different since you've been independent and on your own.
Yes.
Have you ever been pulled over with Eric in the car? Or have you ever been in the car when Eric's gotten pulled over?
Yes.
Does your anxiety level just like go through the roof?
Yes. He's better in those situations. I think we've only been pulled over once, and he was driving. And I started to like grab him, clench up, like we're pulled over, and he's like, "I'm fine, everything's fine." Like he's used to. He has calmed me in those moments because he's used to it.
I just can't imagine. I know there's a story I was thinking about. A woman I used to work with whose husband's black and she's white, and they got pulled over, and she's been asked multiple times while they've been in the car together. The police officers looked at her and been like, "Are you okay?"
Oh wow. Oh, it was interesting actually because they made me give my ID too.
Oh,
Which was
that's
interesting.
never been. I've never been asked for that.
I do remember that happened.
Weird. That's weird.
They didn't ask me if I was okay or ask me if I was safe or anything, but they just asked for both of our IDs, and I was like, "This
that's
is
a little
weird.
different.
This is,
That's
I've never
not
had
the
this
same
happen."
vibe. No.
Yeah, you're not driving the car. Why should you have to give your ID?
Yeah.
But also was not in a place to argue. Said, "Okay, sir."
Sure.
Yes,
I
no.
understand.
Have you come in contact often with racism in like church settings or religious settings?
Unfortunately, that has been like more of a like as me and my husband are established and in this area right now, it has taken us a really long time to find a church that we both felt welcome, accepted in. Because I grew up around white people, being in a church with a bunch of white people doesn't bother me as much as it bothers him. It's also we're not both getting what we need. Like, I don't want that. I want diversity. I think of just a few months ago, I was asked by a local pastor why black men don't come to our church. And that in itself was an offensive question to ask. But I had to explain these are the reasons why, because black men don't feel safe enough to be themselves in your space. And that's been the hardest thing for us, finding a church space that does make us both feel safe enough to be ourselves in all of our blackness. I don't want to have to mask to come to church. My husband doesn't want to have to mask to come to church. We want to just be able to come to church, get some worship on, go home, like do our business. We don't want to have to put on our code switch to come to church.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that, how much energy it has to take to just a
Energy.
code switch.
Yeah. Energy. We have to do that during the work week. We don't want to have to do that on it's a
yeah.
lot.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So yeah, church has been a hard space to navigate as well. Churches in general are just terrible places. So that's a whole nother conversation.
Which is so sad because that's the space in theory, right? In theology theory, that you should feel accepted unconditionally and like you can be 100% yourself. And unfortunately,
it's not the case.
Not the case. So to round us out here, I'm curious to know what actionable steps can white allies take to better understand and address systemic racism in their communities?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't have Black friends, go find some. So that is first. Like, I know people say that all the time, and it's not like you can go pick them up off the corner of the street, but you can intentionally build relationship with people that don't look like you. So if you don't have relationship with people that don't look like you, there's your first problem, because you're not really ever going to be able to be an ally in your community if you don't know what it's like to walk alongside life with somebody that is Black, somebody that has very different experiences than you. Secondly, I would say to get involved in intentional spaces in your community that, like, whether that's going to a church that's Black, or whether that's going to a school district to volunteer, whether that's moving to put your kids in a school district where there's kids that look like them and kids that don't look like them. I know you guys have made intentional choices about where your kids go to school so that they are getting those diverse experiences. That's not something that a lot of people are willing to do, but that is not just being an ally, but also raising allies in your kids. And I think that is super important.
It's just to be alongside other people who weren't like me. Mm-hmm. And it makes you feel like so much more connected to people that just don't look like you.
Yeah. And then you start to realize we're really not all that different. It's really the world and the media that tries to paint our differences against each other when, like, really, we're not that different. I think of disc tendencies, both colors. There's DICS, Enneagram, both colors. Like, every number, both colors. Like, personality types are the same on both sides of the equation.
Right. But we do see color, but we see it because it matters.
It matters.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate you coming today and taking time out of your day to do this. I know that you're a very busy woman, so very much appreciate it. That's going to wrap us up for today. As a reminder, if you have anything you want to share with us or any stories that you feel would be beneficial for our listeners, please feel free to email us at pinkpillrx@gmail.com. And all the stories will be shared anonymously unless specifically stated that you want your name included. I appreciate everybody who's already sent in stories. I read them. I save them. I try to respond to them. I'm still working through a bunch recently here that I'm still trying to respond to. So hopefully if you have emailed a story and haven't gotten a response yet, hopefully you'll get one soon.
I hope for those of you listening, something was intriguing or sparked a curiosity, or you felt affirmed or challenged. Stay educated. Take the pink pill. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a follow and maybe a nice review.